Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I interview founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, amazing people all around the world of crypto and blockchain. And today I have another amazing guest. It's a repeat company. I interviewed the CEO back in May or April, but I have an amazing guest today. Her name is Amal Ibraymi. She is the counsel at Aztec Labs. Amal, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jamil. I'm so excited to join you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining me today. This is going to be wonderful. I want to kick things off and ask you the first question. What is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
Yeah, great question to start. So I'm the legal counsel at Aztec. For people that don't know what Aztec is, we're first open source encrypted programmable zero knowledge roll-up on Ethereum, and we intend to allow decentralized applications to fully benefit from programmable privacy, encryption, and fast and cheaper transactions. How I ended here is I feel like everyone in crypto is always a little bit of not a straightforward path necessarily, but as an attorney, I kind of started my career more on the regulatory side. I worked for international organizations like the UN and the OECD, and did a lot of privacy work there, and then ultimately moved to private practice, keeping that focus on privacy and cybersecurity. And I've been working on these issues for over 6 years now. And as an associate at a private law firm, one day I had a case on my desk that was more regulatory work focused on CBDCs. And why it ended up on my desk is you can't think of CBDCs without thinking of privacy. So I started doing research on that. And that's when I heard for the first time the word zero knowledge and generally just privacy enhancing technology. And then I went down that rabbit hole, and I never came out, because for me, it was kind of evident that, if you care about privacy, especially for me as that being my job, the end game, the end solution has to be zero knowledge. I've seen, reading about it, I've seen all the potential. And then I just decided to leave my job and join Aztec, because for me, they truly are the leading organization when it comes to caring about privacy, developing the right tools for just ensuring privacy for applications going forward.
Awesome. So, a lot of my conversations with people who are building zero knowledge are developers, or either the entrepreneurs or the developers. I've never had a legal perspective on the importance of zero knowledge. So I want to ask you about that first. What is your role and vision and mission at Aztec from a legal perspective? And then also, what intrigues you about zero knowledge from that legal perspective?
Yeah, kind of coming from a legal standpoint, I got to see that the way we're thinking of regulation today is just not working. It's not really efficient. And on the other side, when you get to explore the potential behind the technology, that potential is just not being tapped in. And the reason for that is our systems, as we're thinking about them, are completely outdated. So you just have that disconnect. We have systems that are not working. We have laws that are outdated. And then you have this new technology that could solve a lot of these problems, but nobody's really willing to look into it to bridge that gap. So for me, coming from, again, a regulatory and legal background, I see such a huge potential. And what led me ultimately to come here is hoping that I can kind of help facilitate that dialogue and work forward to promote these technologies, educate people as to why privacy is important, and how ultimately we can implement zero knowledge in day-to-day applications, both in the public sector and the private sector. And I think just really help improve the way we're interacting on a daily basis with digital applications.
So I want to find out why you feel privacy is important, then how you also see privacy regulation evolving globally, and what impact that's having on crypto adoption.
Yeah, that's such a key question. I mean, because the way we live today is really what forces us to care about privacy. Everything now is online, and we know that anything that is online will live online forever, ultimately. So any kind of applications that we're using today is all about collecting our data. And that would be fine if we knew that that data was being stored, processed, and secured properly. We know that's not the case. In my previous job, a big part of my work was to just work with companies that dealt with data breaches. And we've seen just so much tragedy in there on a daily basis. So we know that, again, uh, we have a system that is just based on data hoarding. That data is not being secured. Now we're asking for more and more data that is more sensitive from people being just put online and kind of open for grabs at the end. So I see like a huge risk from that perspective. Again, maybe putting my privacy lawyer hat on, for me, that's a huge risk. Um, and I think, again, the potential there is to really think outside the box to solve this problem. And I think when we think of zero knowledge proof, for instance, we really have the potential to solve that. But the big blocker that we're facing right now as legal practitioners is that we don't really have harmonization when it comes to how regulators across the world are thinking about privacy. What we really have in the current state is maybe we can put two different buckets of jurisdictions. We have jurisdictions that are kind of recognizing strong privacy protections. They recognize the fact that privacy should be a fundamental right. I'm thinking of Europe, for instance, or even Singapore. But they still operate with this outdated framework when it comes to compliance, financial oversight, which kind of, again, comes back to this fundamental incompatibility with how things are working. And then we have a second bucket of jurisdictions that don't really care about privacy. It's not a fundamental right. We're seeing kind of an uptick of maybe interest from regulators to maybe develop a framework. But if you don't recognize privacy as a fundamental right within the Constitution, you're not going to go very far in developing those frameworks. And I'm thinking more specifically about the US. Currently in the US, there's no federal regime for privacy. It's not a right that is explicitly recognized in the Constitution. So that's just a huge blocker. What we have is kind of a mosaic of state laws that are very focused on just consumer protection. But a lot of these, ultimately, when they're being put in place, are more concerned about the business side of things and making sure that the compliance burden is not too high on businesses, less so than really caring about the end users and their data. So again, we have another gap here. And ultimately, even if we're seeing all these efforts and general concerns for financial stability and consumer protections, it's none of this is really reconcilable with the way society is living today, being fully digital, and it's even less reconcilable with blockchain in its nature because blockchain is immutable, it's public. So there we have another huge gap that is being created, and I think L2 solutions like Aztec or even L1 solutions really have the ability to bridge all of these gaps ultimately with programmable privacy, because you can kind of leverage it as needed to kind of respond to this very diverse and complex regulatory landscape as it exists.
What I've noticed recently is more of a, I guess, more of a, say, a push or more recognition of some of the privacy coins like Zcash, Monero,
Yeah.
those. So there's more emphasis. I think, when you said strong privacy rules, and you said Europe, I'm thinking, didn't GDPR fail as a, or didn't go as expected? And how would we strengthen that, or what lessons could we learn from there to apply to the U.S. Rules and regulations as we try to build them out?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question. I think depending on who you ask this question, I think the response will be different. I think from a US perspective, we can feel that maybe the GDPR is just a burden and we're not seeing a real result. Because from a European standpoint, at the end of the day, companies are still finding loopholes to just kind of avoid having servers in the EU, limiting data collections maybe in the EU, ultimately to just bypass the GDPR. But ultimately, outside, that data is still up for grabs. And we're still seeing, even within the EU, massive data breaches that are happening regularly. So I think from that standpoint, GDPR has failed to achieve its fundamental mission, which was to protect the privacy rights of EU data subjects. But on the other end, I think we can't really call it a full failure or just beat on GDPR, because it still went that extra step ahead to at least put something in place to recognize privacy, which I think that initial recognition is lacking in so many other jurisdictions, that I would be a little more cautious on just kind of saying it's a complete failure. But I think it comes back to the fact that it's just outdated. Ultimately, it's already outdated. And that's kind of what we deal with in tech in general, is that the law has such a hard time catching up on the way the new technologies are evolving, that it's more that GDPR now is becoming irrelevant, especially if you think through the lens of blockchain. How does GDPR even apply to blockchain? It doesn't really work. Who would be a data processor in a decentralized blockchain? That just, those questions are not big. You can't even respond to them, because the regulatory framework that was put in place is just fundamentally incompatible with the way the technology exists.
Yeah. So I want to explore that. You didn't say, that was you put that as an example of a strong area. Some of the weak areas I saw, are like India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Iran. I never put U.S. in that weak category, right? I'm like, but it makes sense that it is, right? So
It probably shouldn't be, because for a country that truly believes in freedom and giving the freedom to its citizen, it shouldn't find itself in that position. Because for me, the lack of privacy, if you think no privacy, I think immediately about surveillance. And you don't want to be in that bucket ultimately. So that's why I think as a country, the US has everything to gain from embracing privacy to really have a strong stance on the freedom that it believes in as well for its citizens.
well, I don't think anybody wants to live in a surveillance state.
Absolutely not.
That's why people had such a problem with the wearing masks during COVID. Is there people thought it was surveillance state, you
Yeah.
know. But luckily we live in the U.S. and we have the opportunity to discuss policy, right?
Yeah.
So what are the biggest challenges when it comes to privacy policy, and what policy changes or frameworks do you think would best support, innovation in decentralized economy and Web3?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real kind of difficulties that we're facing, especially kind of legal practitioners and people in the policy space, I think it's really kind of getting to explain what the technology is and educating regulators as to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis to just kind of alleviate any fears that they may have about the technology that we're building. It's also kind of putting the spotlight on developers to really give them the opportunity to explain what they're doing. And then finally, I think it's also having that opportunity to put together either pilot programs or applications that can be used on a day-to-day basis. Right now, that's not the case because Unfortunately, I think a lot of companies are worried to deploy sometimes their programs because we've seen a lot of enforcement actions and very strict regulatory scrutiny. But we need that. We need that safe harbor for applications and privacy protocols to be able to launch and show that they work. And we've seen, for instance, private adoption through Google embracing ZK, for instance. So we know that we're already there. It's already mainstream. We just need that extra push and that extra acceptance from the regulatory side to allow us to really showcase the full potential of that technology.
I agree. It's interesting you mentioned Google. I got my first warning from them about one of my contents in my podcast. Like, what? I'm like, they got it wrong. I did an appeal. I'm like, I did nothing wrong here. Like, so like, I'm trying to like figure out how they surveil, incorrectly. But, I do care about digital privacy. I should probably buy some more. I have Litecoin, but I should buy more privacy cryptos, right? But why should people care about digital privacy? And how can it improve our lives if we took more care of our digital, online identity?
Yeah, that's, I think, a fundamental question, and probably one of the hardest one to answer as well, because you can't, how do you get someone to care about something? It's so subjective. But again, I'll go back to, like, we all have to think about the nature we live in, and the fact that the way we're operating today is just putting most of our data online. And the fact is that action is kind of irreversible. There's nothing we can do about it. Once you go that route, you can't really come back. So that's, for me, argument number one. Like, I never want to operate in that kind of model. You always want to have a safety net, because ultimately we don't know what will happen to that data. And again, in the US, you don't really have real privacy laws that are imposing that the data be secured appropriately, for instance. So anything that you put out there, it has a huge question mark next to it as to what do they do with it ultimately. And then you also have the fact that without privacy, pretty much everything that we do is traceable, whether that's financially, whether that's socially, whether that's even politically. And I think you enter that kind of dangerous line around surveillance, as well, as we discussed earlier. That's kind of argument number two that kind of comes to mind. And then number three is also the fact that we're seeing such a massive uptick in data exposures, breaches, scam, fraud in general online, manipulation, identity theft. Those are really serious threats. They maybe can feel far removed from people on the day-to-day basis, but it happens when you expect it the least. And unfortunately, I've worked with people that had their identity stolen. It does ruin people's life, and that's a really serious concern. A final point as well, I think, that we all have to kind of keep in mind is we live in a world where now AI is part of our day-to-day life. Everyone maybe uses ChatGPT or other AI engines, and we know that those AI systems thrive on data. They only collect every data that is possible to train their models. Again, we don't really know where that's going, but that could easily end up being weaponized against us as individuals to predict our behavior, influence our decisions as well. And I think that line between automation and surveillance, again, is getting blurred and becoming more and more dangerously thin. And I think these are issues that we need to think about kind of as a society and as daily users. And I think the key questions and the key maybe challenge is, for privacy to really thrive, I think it's up to the users to request it ultimately. And for individuals, I don't see what they have to lose ultimately in wanting their privacy, because ultimately it's all about retaining control over your data. If you want to sell it, you could, but if you don't want to, you should have the option not to as well.
Got it. There's a fine line. You said social media and automation versus surveillance. You don't know, when you're in social media like X or maybe even Telegram, you don't really know who's a bot and who's a person, and you don't know the line between the automation and surveillance. So you know, unsuspecting person, like how can you, and sometimes it's really hard to tell, how can you begin to distinguish, if somebody's has, not so good intent for you before you even go down that road of providing them your data?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting harder and harder. I wish I had the response, but I feel like a lot of these systems are being so perfected that now when you scroll down any social media app, it's really becoming harder for us as users to know what is real and what is false. And the fact is there are also no laws around social media platforms disclosing their algorithms, for instance, which could be like a good first steps for users to kind of know ultimately how some of the content is being posted, how some of the content is being boosted, and how are these applications flagging AI generated content, for instance. But we have none of that. So I think a lot of this situation, again, takes us back to the need for regulations. And the need for regulators again to sit down with developers and technologists who really understand how everything is done and try and carve laws that are no longer outdated but really reflect the current state of the technology.
Got it. So Aztec, you have an opportunity. Aztec has an opportunity, right? One
Absolutely.
is you could help institutions bridge standards with decentralized systems, right? And two is, I guess, you could be involved in activism. You know, how do you think that Aztec can help developers, regulators, and institutions, develop these privacy first standards? How do you think? How do you, does your company think it should look?
I mean, that's my dream question. So the way I see it, it's for me, Aztec can act as the critical bridge that connects the transparent nature of blockchain and decentralized system more generally to the strict confidentiality and compliance requirements that are mandated by institutional finance, for instance, or the regulations in general, even like regulatory institutions. And what we're seeing is right now, a lot of the institutions have been hesitant to fully adopt blockchain as a technology because of the lack of privacy. There's only so much you can do with blockchain if it's transparent. And you can't, no one wants to have all of their information as a business, as a private business, put into the public. So without that, I don't think we'll be able to fully scale as an industry. So for me, I really see a programmable end-to-end privacy as the solution that will allow us to bring crypto and this entire industry to the mainstream by allowing institutions to be onboarded and fully embrace it and see the value in it by using it on a day-to-day basis.
Say I'm a CEO of I don't know, AIG, where I used to work years ago, a different life. And yeah, I want to move into Web3, and I want to take my traditional insurance products and bring them to Aave or something, or Chainlink.
Yeah.
Okay, and Aztec. And but I don't want any of my competitors, like a MetLife or Prudential or anybody, to see my proprietary information, right? So how would I, as a CEO, be able to bring, to go to Web3 and remain, and have my competitors not see any of my IP? Like, where do you strike that balance, and how do you move the certain parts of the company into the new world?
Yeah. I think the best way to kind of, if you had to describe it to a CEO, the best way to put it forward is what makes you feel comfortable today to use internet, for instance, on a day-to-day basis for your company. I think the main response would be SSL encryption, most likely. The fact that the internet is encrypted is really what allowed it to scale in the long run. If the internet was fully transparent, we would not be using it on the day-to-day basis. So for me, the same kind of rationale applies to crypto. You have, as a company and as a CEO, you have to be interested in encryption and how you can leverage it to scale your business while also protecting your secret recipe ultimately. And I think that's really what we have to push forward as a narrative for this entire industry to scale and get to that mainstream level that we really all wanted to succeed and get to.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So right now we're at a crossroads where more companies need to be into Web3. So that brings us to real world tokenization, right? So how do you see privacy technology influencing the future of RWA tokenization of digital assets?
Yeah, I think again, like same as kind of my previous example, I think tokenization will only reach a mainstream if privacy and compliance are built in it. I don't think we can compromise on either. It's more of like thinking of a new system and getting out, letting go of the outdated compliance systems. That actually makes me think of this excellent letter that was published by Coinbase in response to a consultation for the IRS, where they specifically said that we need to let go of outdated compliance system. I think that's first what we need to do in order to all start thinking of the future of tokenization and get it to the level we want to get it to. And I mean, again, like if we're thinking of tokenization, we can't think of any real world assets, let's say, I don't know, even salaries, social credentials, in the current state of things being put on chain. I think that would be a disaster. Everything is public. This is just not really conceivable at this point. So that's when we need privacy solutions like Aztec that brings programmable privacy that allows for kind of that perfect balance between the need for privacy and the need for compliance to ensure that tokenization can scale ultimately, and it can do so securely.
Interesting. You said you can't. I've had conversations with projects that are bringing either a social score or a credit score to people who have not been part of the banking system, the traditional banking system. And so what you're saying is that's not possible to do. How do you think that these social scoring systems can be implemented and be effective so that we can onboard the people who are unbanked?
Yeah, it's possible to do it. It just means that you will be putting all these very precious and sensitive information on chain and have it most likely be public. So what you will be effectively creating is a very elaborate surveillance system for everyone to kind of have access to each other's maybe social scores or behaviors more generally. What you need is a privacy buffer, because you can't have that information be accessible to the public without privacy. For me, that's just inconceivable. And I doubt also that people will likely agree to it. I think there'll be pushback. So again, a lot of these use cases that we're seeing when it comes to tokenization, ultimately the hurdle that they face is privacy, because you need a layer to just kind of blur a portion of the information. You can't have that open in the public. And that's also kind of ultimately how I ended up in my current position, is clients coming to me and saying, listen, we have this problem. We want to build this app. We want to create this use case, but we feel like people won't use it if it's just out in the open on chain. So that's again kind of, for me, what we always come back to this same kind of core fundamental problem is you will need some kind of programmable privacy application embedded in that in order to really allow for any kind of tokenization use case to scale, and also bring comfort to the people to adopt it and use it on a day-to-day basis.
So everything has to to me like everything should have some level of privacy element.
Exactly.
In order.
Yeah. Yeah. At least that's how I conceive things. And yeah, I don't think there's really room for compromise for that, because again, once we go the other way, if everything is public, that's irreversible. So we have to be very careful when thinking about it.
My clubbing days were in the 90s. And I'm so grateful that those were my clubbing days before any social media stuff. Anybody, you don't know what I did. You don't need to know what I did. So we're good. So yeah. So I want to thank you very much, for speaking with me today. I enjoyed the conversation with you. And yeah. And I have one last question. And so, how can people find out more information about you, about Aztec Labs? How can they educate themselves regarding privacy? How can they do that?
That's a great question. And thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to just have this conversation today and just get to talk more about probably my favorite topic. It was a real treat for me. But yeah, to learn about Aztec, you can go on our social media. We have a very active Twitter that keeps all of our community up to date with everything that we have coming up. We also have our website. And on the regulatory side, if you're interested in the work that we've been doing, on our website, we also have a policy principle page that we keep up to date with all of our engagements with various regulators and lawmakers to just really advocate for privacy and also kind of explaining further why this is important. And we've also been developing a series of ZK use cases that we publish regularly to just kind of educate users more generally as the potential behind ZK. So you can find most of that on our website and on our Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine.